Before I begin, it would be ill manners of me, number one, but just irresponsible of me as a person to not thank you all for last Sunday. I spent an entire week trying to figure out how to say thank you properly, and in a week I discovered that I don't have a grasp of the English language sufficient enough to properly thank you for what you did for me, and for my family, and for people who came from wherever they came from. So I can only leave it at that. But thank you. Thank you immensely for what you did for us you last Sunday. That will be one of the greatest days of my entire life. Last week we looked in Galatians on Sunday morning. We looked in Galatians the Sunday before that. We continue to look in Galatians today. We look at the 6th chapter. Your bulletin says it will look from verses 1 through 5 of chapter 6. And as I studied it during the weekend, we're going to bump that up a little bit to the 25th verse of chapter 5 and then go through. But I had the ability to talk to some people about the sermon last Sunday, and people called me and were giving words of encouragement to me. And one thing that kept coming up to the people that were talking to me is they said, you know, what you said Sunday was so true that it's now funny. That every time something bad happens or every time something difficult arises, these people said they would look at each other and go, and then giggle, because they would remember that was sort of what I was trying to stress. Is that as a people of faith, that's all we're good at doing. We look at something terrible and we manage to say, but what then? And that was actually the question that people were calling and asking me and hoping that I would give them some guidance, and my guidance was on the church Sunday. That we're going to continue that line of thought. Because that's the immediate question that you ask. You see something awful. Take, for example, Memphis, Tennessee, my hometown. That place has been in the news recently for all reasons you don't want to be in the news. One of them is that in a certain area of Memphis known as Fraser, they have Fraser High School, which they have more pregnant girls at that school than at any other high school, I believe, in the entire country. In Fraser High School. And so you see something like that on TV and you say to yourself, and then the next question is, what do I do? Or you say, what can I do? Because I'm a nobody. What do I do? Well, Paul was dealing with these same people in Galatia that were giving Paul cause to look at them and say, Remember last week, Paul says, all politeness aside, you cannot be this stupid. That is Paul saying, because that's what that noise really means. That noise sort of means it can't be this bad. So what do you do? What comes next? What does a responsible, moral, ethical Christian do when hope is completely gone? Well, Paul, remember I had mentioned to you before, and I don't want this to be the only thing that sticks with you as we have looked through Galatians during January, but I want it to be one of the things that sticks with you, and that is that Paul's angry. This whole time he writes this letter, he is writing from a state of frustration and anger at what these people have been willing to do to the gospel. But in the closing of what we refer to as chapter 5, and the beginning of chapter 6, he softens a bit. And he gives them practical, responsible, and precious information on what they should be doing. And so we look here. Verse 25 of chapter 5, he begins and says, If we live by the Spirit, then let us also walk by the Spirit. Let us not become boastful, challenging one another, envying one another. Brothers, even if anyone is caught in a trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness. Each one looking to yourself, so that you too will not be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and thereby fulfill the law of Christ. For if anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But each one must examine his own work, and then he will have a reason for boasting in regard to himself alone, and not in regard to another. For each one will bear his own load. The damage that was being done to the churches in Galatia was coming largely, we assume, we think, we understand, by two different religious groups. One being the Judaizers, the people who said, this Christianity thing is pretty good, but you still need to be holding to all these laws of Jewish history. You still have to be circumcised. You still have to obey dietary requirements. You still not ought to, have to do all of those things and believe in Jesus. Okay? Jesus is good, it's just not enough. And then these other group of people that are challenging the churches in Galatia are what we would refer to now as Gnostics. And that was a group of people who thought there was some secret knowledge that you had to obtain. But also, by the way, since Jesus is all those good things, you can do whatever you want. Now, I say we call them Gnostics now because really and truly what's being referred to here by Paul is not Gnosticism as we will understand it much later in history, but this is where it's starting to bubble up. And one of the things they say, on this side of the stage, I have legalism. You must have to do legalism. So you guys are legalists, okay? This side of the church, this side of the stage, this is the libertarian. This, do whatever you want. Because you're saved by grace, so who cares? Don't worry about it. Just do whatever you want. Obey the law. Who cares about the law? You're the Galatians. Which one do you choose? Which one do you believe? Which one do you understand? Is it that much different today? Today, you can be Hindu and live in Louisville, Mississippi. You can be Jewish. You can be Protestant. We can divide that up so you can be Baptist, Methodist, Presbyterian, you can be Charismatic, Church of Christ, Assemblies of God, Pentecostal. You can be Muslim. You can be polytheistic, but just not really have a definition. You can be agnostic. There's something there, but it can't be named. You can be atheist. There's nothing. You can be a Wiccan. It's the tree god, the Mother Earth. You can be in. Which one is right? Which one is true? Because everyone who believes in that will tell you theirs is. So, when you become unsure, you might trip a little in your faith and start to do something that's not really right or not really called for, and you would be caught up, right? Caught up in some difficulty. Or you could just be a regular old Joe, and you have some difficulty and you get caught up in doing something. Today's Sunday school lesson was on greed. If you don't come to Sunday school, let me encourage you. The church provides opportunities for further study, better off probably most of the time than what you're hearing up here, but it provides you a chance to study and talk back with those who have studied the same thing. But in Sunday school, we talked about greed and how people have gotten caught up in greed. And we talked about religious organizations. All of you know the name, whether you know what he looks like, or whether you've ever heard him speak a word. Most of us in this room know who Jim Baker is. Most of us know who Jimmy Swaggart is. Most of us know the man who wears white suits and has white hair named Benny Hinn. Most of us have seen those people on the TV that say, there's somebody out there in America right now watching, and their hip hurts. I'm telling them, their name starts with an E. Reach out, touch that TV screen. Let me pray for you, and then send me some money, and I promise that hip will feel better. You've seen or heard or dealt with, maybe personally, those things before, and you get caught up. And Paul says in the first verse of chapter 6, brothers, if anyone is caught, if anyone is snared, if anyone is tangled in a trespass, is how the New American defines that, a sin, something wrong. I notice in my Bible, the first verse does not say, if anybody's caught up in that, crucify them publicly, shame them beyond reproach, and never talk to them again. My Bible doesn't say that. Yet, time after time after time, that's the one thing you can count on the Christian church to do, is to burn a sinner at the stake. I mentioned last Sunday, this is the only army that will shoot its own wounded. And I didn't go any further than that. I hope that's just self-explanatory. But normally, in a military entanglement, you go attack something, you lose. But you go get your wounded and you try to treat them back to health. Normally not so in the church. We're all saints here right now because we don't know enough about what somebody else is doing. But we don't know enough about what so-and-so is in the middle of. Guess what? I'm not going to go to them and minister to them, am I? I'm going to call Sal Joe. Do you know what John Doe has been doing? Have you heard that the police were at his house last night? No. They're calling his cousin's best friend's sister-in-law's housekeeper to see if they know something. Now, church, am I lying to you? Am I confused? Because I don't believe so. I believe instead that opinion that I just shared with you about what the church will do to you when you fall or trip or become ensnared in a sin is what the world assumes happens every single time in a Christian church. Every time. I'm going to burn you. You know why? It makes me look good. Do you know what he did? I've never done that. Right? So when I stand next to him, look at how good I look. Because I did not do that. Instead, doesn't the first verse of chapter 6 in your Bible say, brothers, if any one of you be entangled or caught or ensnared in any trespass, go to them, and in gentleness restore that brother. Is that what yours says? Something like it? But do we live that? See, I watch the television and I see, guaranteed, every night, something awful. Whether it's in a commercial, whether it's on the news, or whether it's in whatever show comes on. I'm going to see something awful, and guaranteed, I will muster the strength to say, But then I think, what can I do? You know the first thing you can do is assume that you're required to do something. Do you know how much that changes the whole situation? See, if I think God is okay with me seeing that terrible instance on the television or in my community or right next door, if I think God is okay with me saying, and that's it, that's all I'll ever do. But when I come to realize that God is not only asking me to just do that, but He is also commanding me through the Holy Scripture to do something, then guess what that becomes?